Right, I think that should be everybody. So we'll get started. Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining us and welcome. So this webinar is the last of the series of the different role-based webinars that we're holding. So this one is designed specifically for operations. So if you work in production, packing, warehousing to some extent, any of those supervisory roles or management roles, then this is designed for you. We're going to be just going through the requirements or the changes to issue 9 with regard to the factory-based aspects. So if you're a techie on this call, you're very welcome, but please bear in mind that this isn't designed for you specifically. It's just focusing on the operations elements of the issue 9. We're going to show you a video which is about 10 minutes long, so it's not long, but you should be able to get lots out of it. During the video, if you have any questions that you want to ask, then please do pop those in the Q&A. There's a little Q&A tab or icon at the top of your screen, so if you just pop them in there, we'll coordinate those and we'll answer them all at the end. So we should have about 20 minutes for questions at the end, hopefully. Please do ask questions because it's your opportunity to do so. Happy to answer anything that you want to talk about. So with that being said, let's pop the video on. Just bear with me while I mess about trying to get everything to work. Hold on one tick. Welcome to an overview of the changes in issue 9 for operations. This webinar is designed for the operations team who want an overview of the changes in BRCGS Food Safety from issue 8 to issue 9. Full transparency before we start. We are not affiliated to BRCGS in any way, and we are not a BRCGS approved training provider. This is because we've chosen not to be, as we don't want to have to stick to the curriculum provided by BRCGS, as we believe that this prevents the training from being actionable. We're also not going to be able to go through every change in the standard during this webinar, as that would take too long. What we will do is highlight to you the key points of the standard that you need to focus on ready for your next audit. To enable this, we've gone through the standard and the interpretation guide for both issue 8 and issue 9 and compared them line by line. We've not used the BRCGS Key Changes document for this, as we know that this doesn't call out all the important changes to the level of detail that we would need. This webinar will explain some of the outputs of that piece of work. We won't be showing you extracts from the standard, as BRCGS wouldn't allow us to do this for copyright reasons, and you'll probably know by now that we like to do things our way, as we like to make it simple and easy to understand. Okay, with that being said, let's crack on. Key dates. The new standard was published on the 1st of August and will be audited from the 1st of February 2023. Therefore, if you have your audit on or from the 1st of February, you'll be audited to issue 9. The changes. BRCGS have called out a number of changes within the standard, but not all of them will impact you in the operations team. We're going to go through just the changes that will impact you, which are culture, handheld equipment, waste handling, lab standard testing, process control and printed packaging controls. Culture. Culture was introduced into the BRCGS standard in issue 8, and the requirements to it have been strengthened for issue 9. As a member of the operations team, it's possible that you've not heard of culture before. So let's just go over some background before we get into the detail of the changes. What is culture? This is a huge topic, but very simply put, culture is a set of beliefs, attitudes and expectations. When applied to a business, it's like the personality that the business chooses to have. What's important to the business, what it wants to achieve, and the impacts that it wants to have. Defining the culture of a business allows the management team to then identify how they want their employees to behave. What this means to your business. This means that your business for issue 8 had to define what culture it wanted. It then had to establish if the employees within your business felt it was achieving the defined culture. And where there was a difference between what it wanted to achieve and what the employees in the business thought, this would then create an action plan for improvement. What this means now. 3 years on, this means that your business should already have a culture plan in place, and your management team should be reviewing it regularly to keep adding improvement actions. For Issue 9, there are a few additions to the requirements. They're only small, but the impact of them is going to be huge, so you need to know what they are, as they'll affect you personally and your department. The changes in culture. The changes in Issue 9 for culture are that your business must define how it wants its employees to behave. The senior team must review culture annually. At least one of the senior team must present culture at the audit. And culture is referenced throughout the standard. Let's now look at what that means as a whole, and specifically what it means to you in operations. What the changes mean. The easiest way to understand the changes is to compare how audits typically used to be managed to how they need to be managed in the future. Compliance to the standard and running an audit has always been a technical job. However, what the standard is looking for with these culture changes is for a change in behaviour with regard to compliance. Compliance and the audit should no longer be seen as something that technical looks after, but instead it must now be a team effort. One of the changes was that at least one of the senior team must present culture at the audit. The reason that BRCGS want this to happen is that they want to see that your business is sharing the responsibility of the audit, that the whole of the senior team is accountable for compliance to the standard. In theory, this means that the most senior person on site must present senior management commitment, as this is their area of accountability. The procurement lead will need to present supplier management. Engineering will need to present equipment and maintenance, and so on. As a member of the operations team, you need to be prepared to present your area of accountability, which is the practical controls in the factory. This means that you need to understand what's required to comply with the standard for these sections, and what the changes are within Issue 9 that impact you. Handheld equipment. In Issue 8, a clause was added, which meant we had to control pens. For Issue 9, this clause has been expanded to cover all handheld equipment. This means that you must implement controls for everything that can be held in your hand and is portable. So it now covers all types of stationery, monitoring equipment, etc. You must ensure that you log this type of equipment and risk assess it to determine the controls needed to prevent contamination. Waste handling. We've always had to control waste, but for Issue 9 there's an increased focus on it. This means that you must have a risk assessment, which identifies the risks involved with handling waste, and therefore the controls that are required to prevent contamination. The identified controls must be written into procedures, which are then trained out to all staff who are involved with handling waste and their supervisors. Lab standard testing. This is probably the most complicated of the operational changes, but don't be put off. It means that where you complete testing on site, which is for legal, safety or authenticity purposes, it must be controlled to a lab standard. The term lab standard means it must be controlled in detail because the results are so important. To do this, you need to use methods that are traceable to accredited standards. The methods must be written into procedures and trained out to staff who carry out the tests. And the environment that the tests are carried out in must also be controlled. Process control. We've always had to have process control in place, managed by work instructions, process specifications, and other documents such as quality attribute sheets. For Issue 9, the requirements have been expanded to state that all process documentation must be kept up to date. And the interpretation now includes a list of all the information that should be included in the documents. This means that there will be additional focus on this clause by auditors, so you need to ensure that you've got robust systems in place. Printed packaging control. This is a big change. But if you're a site which produces for M&S or Morrisons, you'll already have this covered, as it's part of their requirements already. You now need to issue printed packaging to the line and then reconcile it after the run is complete. This means you need a way of counting printed packaging. This doesn't mean you necessarily have to sit and count each piece of packaging, but it does mean you need to be able to estimate the quantity within a given accuracy. The purpose of this is so that you can identify if the wrong packaging has been used, or if some of the wrong product has been packed. That way you can then investigate to find out what's gone wrong and put it right. Your next steps. To enable you to present the changes confidently at audit and explain how you've implemented them, you're going to need to understand the requirements in detail. To do this, we would recommend that you complete the Issue 9 for Operations training course. This will take you through the changes to the standard and how to implement them. The training is made up of 5 mini videos, which will take you less than 3 hours to complete. It's actionable, so you'll know exactly what you need to do. That way, when it comes to the audit, you'll be able to explain to the auditor the changes to the standard that impact your department and what you've done about them. That's the end of the presentation, so we'll now move on to questions. Okay, hopefully you should be able to hear me again. So if anybody has any questions from what you've just seen, please pop them into the Q&A and we'll work our way through answering them. Do we have any yet, Mel?
Not at the moment. If you've just got any questions in general as well, happy to try and answer those related to issue 9. You can use the chat or you can use the Q&A tab. Paul Weeks is asking if there's any changes to on-site shelf life testing.
No, not specifically. There are changes around, well, it's been stressed about validation and verification of shelf life testing, so you obviously need to make sure that you've validated it, and then there needs to be routine verification, whether that's once a year that you're sending samples out for testing or whether you're doing it internally on an ongoing basis. But there's nothing specific. Lab standard testing doesn't specifically relate to that unless you're doing microbiological tests in-house, which most sites don't.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Next question is from Anise. Would you please explain more about the requirements with regards to expected employee behaviour? So I think this is more of a culture style question.
Yeah, so it's not that they're specifying what the behaviour must be, it's that you need to specify as a business what you want from your staff in terms of how you want them to behave. So for example, with culture, you need to define what we call it personality, what the personality of the business it needs to be, what's important to the business. So for example, if you take environment as one of the principles that the company is interested in, you might want to make sure that employees within the business behave in a particular way about the environment, that they promote things like shared driving to work, that type of thing. There's all sorts of different things that you can bring into from a cultural perspective about how people should behave at work. Should they treat each other with respect? That type of thing.
Thanks, Anise. Hector has a question. What is meant by process control docs needing to be kept up to date? Why is this a change?
Okay, so process control documentation needs to be kept up to date. So it obviously always has had to be kept up to date, but now they've actually written it into the clause. So that means that any changes to process specifications or documents that you use in the factory, like setting sheets, quality attribute sheets, all of those things need to be up to date at all times. So if you've got any planned changes to any of the information that's contained on those documents, you need to review that, put actions in place before that change is made so that the documents that are being used in the factory are always up to date. You need to make sure that you've got an amendment log for those as well. So in the same way that you would do for a procedure, you have to log the changes, record them. You're going to have to do the same for those types of documents as well.
Thanks, Hector. Joe's got a question. Can you expand a bit on the lab standard testing and what sort of testing is it referring to?
Okay, so anything that's carried out in-house for legal, safety or authenticity purposes. So think, good example is average weights, so that you would be, you need to test obviously for average weights. The procedure that goes along with that needs to be suitable for accredited methods. So you either have to use a method that's accredited, which you're probably not going to be doing because you're inside the factory. But if you were going to be using something like weights for average weight purposes, then you need to make sure that that method of checking those scales is traceable back to accredited methods. So the weights that you would use, you would make sure that they've been calibrated, and that calibration is traceable back to UCAS standards if it is in this country. So it's basically any of the testing that you would do in-house that's directly relating to the legal requirements of the product, keeps it safe, or is for authenticity purposes. Those are the ones that need to be managed as lab standard. The purpose of lab standard testing is to make sure that it's really accurate in terms of the results that you get. So you have to have accredited methods that we talked about. They need to be documented into procedures. You need to train your staff to make sure that they're doing it right. You need to monitor the staff that are doing those tests to make sure that the results that they're producing are accurate. And you even have to implement proficiency testing if that's something that's relevant to the particular test that you're doing.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Joe. Next question is from Rachel. Please could you define what handheld equipment would include? For example, would it include cleaning utensils as well?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I don't think they're thinking along the lines of cleaning utensils, but you could, I can see where that would work in, but that's not normally going to be held by an operator by the side of the line on a regular basis. So think about anything that operators keep on their tables where they're going to be doing assessments and things. So any stationery that they use, markers, calculators, if they use probes for taking temperatures and things, stuff like that. Anything that they can touch on the side of the line I would include. So you need to log all of that, risk assess it, define what the controls are going to be, and then work that into your documentation so that you can train it out to staff.
Thanks, Rachel. Duncan's next. What would you expect to be covered within a waste risk assessment? Is this for the environment or risk of contamination of material that's not being safely packed for disposal or segregation, etc.?
Yes, so it's not the environmental side of waste, it's the cross-contamination within the factory. So making sure that any waste that's created doesn't get mixed up with good product, that it's segregated correctly so that it can be sent out as the right type of waste, and that it doesn't cause a contamination risk to the product itself.
Thanks, Duncan. Daniel, would an auditor be expecting a measure of culture through or from internal non-conformance findings?
So no, not exactly. That might be one of the actions or measurement techniques that you use within the culture plan as a whole, but it's not something that they're asking for. They do expect from a cultural perspective that management have the right attitude towards non-conformances and making sure that they're closed out properly, that the same actions don't keep getting repeated, that you're using root cause analysis to get to the proper cause of the problem and put it right with preventive actions. So from that perspective, that's important from culture, but the auditor's not going to be looking at your non-conformances as such. it is an indication. I can see what you're saying. It's an indication of how a site is performing and the attitude of the site, and therefore whether they've got the right culture or not. But it's not something that they've pulled out of the standard specifically.
Thanks, Daniel. There's no questions at the moment, Cassie. I don't know if there's anything you want to sort of chat about or go into.
No, I don't think so, other than if anybody comes up with any other questions, if you think of anything that you would like to ask after this webinar, we do have a chat function on the website which calls us directly in the office, so we can answer those questions there, or you're very welcome to just drop me an email. I will be sending an email out after this webinar with a replay for you so that you can share it with your colleagues if you want to, so you'll get my email address from that. And that's it, I think. Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.